Before starting the story, I want to apologize for my bad English. I am not a native speaker. However, I am trying my best for you guys. Thanks for your understanding. It's pretty exciting to admit to your parents the decision to play your own wedding. Tina Thomas was a lot more nervous than her fiancé, Gabe Watson. Tina was 26 years old at the time, just like her future husband, and this was her third serious relationship and second attempt at a wedding. Her first attempt to build a family with boyfriend Scott McCulloch ended in failure. No, the relationship between young people were just fine, but only Tina's mother was against this wedding, and Scott himself she did not like. There were no specific claims, but like every mother, she wanted a better and happier life for her daughter, and Tina herself, at that moment, was still very young. For this reason, the couple soon parted. The mirage of a joint future melted away. The second attempt, with Stan Marks, also failed. Here, Tina's parents did not play any role. The couple could not overcome the first 3-year crisis, and they parted by mutual consent. Finally, on Christmas Eve, at a party of friends, Tina meets Gabe Watson. We can't say it was love at first sight, on the contrary. The relationship was built more as mutual support for each other after a recent breakup. Yes, perhaps this is not the most joyful reason to start building a new relationship, but 2 years later, Gabe proposed marriage to Tina. Tina, having learned from bitter experience, said she agreed, but couldn't do it without parental blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided, like a real prince, beautifully and romantically appealed to the parents of his chosen one and chose Valentine's Day. But Tina's father was away, so the dinner was moved to the next day. On February 15th, during the dinner, when Watson voiced his decision to live with Tina all his life hand in hand, the father of the bride asked a seemingly simple question to the groom. "Does he love Tina?" Gabe stammered like a schoolboy but never answered. His father considered this reaction to be a common embarrassment among strangers. Then he asked his daughter the same question. Surprisingly, Tina did not answer this question directly either, but began her speech by saying that she was afraid of being alone at the age of 26. The father thought for a while and blessed the young ones. Preparing for a wedding takes a lot of time and effort, and while Tina was thinking about her outfit, her guests, and the whole wedding, Gabe was only planning the honeymoon. He didn't care at all how his future wife wanted to spend her vacation. He had already decided everything for her. His plan was to go to the Great Barrier Reef, which is located in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, and go diving there. First of all, to look at the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank back in 1911. The problem was that Tina, unlike Gabe, wasn't into diving. Yes, he took her scuba diving in the pool sometimes, in calm water under the supervision of lifeguards, but no more than that. Gabe, himself, was an experienced scuba diver. He was completing a rescue diving course and had over 50 dives to his credit at the time. And of course, it wasn't in a pool. If you don't learn to dive by our honeymoon, I'm warning you right away. You're staying home, walking the dog, or pruning roses in the garden. You're not going anywhere with me, said Gabe. Tina had no choice. In fact, Gabe even took out a loan to buy her own equipment and pay for her fiancé's classes. The first instructor Tina had taken lessons with was disappointed in her skills and even warned Gabe that his fiancée had absolutely no skills for open ocean swimming. A furious Gabe wouldn't listen to the diving instructor, accusing him of being the one who couldn't explain and refused to continue the class. The second instructor rather quickly gave Tina a credit, although then, and noted that Tina does everything from under the stick, solely to please her future husband. On October 11th, the young couple finally got married, and after 2 days, Tina and Gabe flew to Australia, spending on a trip of $10,000 which gave them for the wedding. It should be noted that Gabe devoted part of the honeymoon to Tina. They walked around Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium and the zoo. Tina was excited, but the closer they got to going to the Great Barrier Reef, the sadder she became. On the morning of October 21st, they flew to Townsville, and in the evening boarded a boat to one of the most beautiful places on Earth and every diver's dream. After a while, employees of the diving company will tell that in fact, the couple did not look like experienced divers, and even Gabe, who had graduated from courses and had experience behind him, could hardly understand the equipment, as if he saw it for the first time in his life. But nevertheless, it was he who helped Tina to pass the exam before diving, although such a test should be conducted separately, and when the instructor offered Tina his help underwater, she refused. It was also noted in the dive log that there was a strong current that day, and this moment in history should not be missed or glossed over. Gabe, as I said, helped his wife sort out the equipment they had bought back in the US and went to get the tanks they had to rent. Gabe took an 11-liter tank for himself and gave his wife an 8.5-liter tank, which for this place was an extremely small volume or even dangerous, given Tina's experience, or rather lack thereof. It was not possible to descend to the Townsville Titanic from the first time. Tina asked for additional cargo because she could not dive to depth, and Gabe at first did not work underwater computer, which calculates the necessary speed of diving and ascent, as well as shows the amount of oxygen in the cylinders. After returning to the boat, the computer worked and they tried again. The wreck was 49 feet deep, and Tina was the first to submerge, Gabe swimming behind her. From Gabe's statement, "At first everything was fine. At some point Tina stopped, started waving at me, and later signaled that she wanted to go up. I realized right away that she was just panicking. She used to do that. By this time we were halfway up, so I decided to calm her down and stay with her at the same depth for a while, without further diving, so that she could psychologically get used to the pressure. She continued to breathe very deeply, which was unsafe, and that's when I noticed she was sinking. I tried to grab her belt to hold her down, but she swung her arms so hard that she knocked the mask off my face. While I was putting the mask back on my face, though it didn't take long, Tina was already too far away from me. For a while I tried to swim to her, but I was unsuccessful. Then I decided to return to the surface to ask for help from the lifeguards. On the way, I met another swimmer with a narrow-set eye, but he paid no attention to my signs for help. Yes, there were 2 Asian men with them at depth, but neither of them confirmed Gabe's words about his request for help. Later, when the police took underwater computer readings, they confirmed that Gabe did try to swim after his drowning wife for a while, but eventually gave up the attempt very quickly. Although the ascent to the surface itself was not an emergency, on the contrary, Gabe surfaced as instructed, stopping at each required depth level. As for the other divers, each of them, when questioned by police, claimed that Gabe could have saved his wife, but he simply did not. In addition, this tragic incident occurred at the very beginning of their dive, and therefore Gabe had enough oxygen in his tanks to swim to the bottom and return back to the surface. The rescuers on duty on the ship, as soon as they realized what had happened, immediately went in search of Tina and found her very quickly. But unfortunately, it was too late. Tina was lying on her back, with her eyes open under her mask, at a depth of 82 feet. Her body was immediately lifted up, and on the deck of the yacht, they gave her artificial respiration for about 40 minutes. But to no avail, Tina died. Gabe all this time did not come close to his wife, but only stood somewhere aside, and according to witnesses, naively sniffed his nose. The same employees of the company said that the young man on the way to the shore and smiled and even played cards with other passengers. Gabe denied this in court. The subsequent autopsy of Tina showed that not everything was so clear. Yes, there are no signs of obvious violent death, but there are bruises on the neck. There are traces of blood in the nostrils, which is also common at the 82-foot depth where Tina's body was found. There are no traces of alcohol in the blood, but there are high levels of drugs such as ibuprofen and paracetamol, although these drugs are used in the treatment of seasickness. A small amount of fluid was seen in the lungs. The report stated that Tina died from drowning, but it is possible that she drowned while already deprived of oxygen. Tina's gear was checked by the Australian Water Police, but no malfunctions were noted. The police could have written it off as an accident. An inexperienced diver ignored safety rules and paid for it with his life. A very common case, unfortunately. But only there were suspicious moments in this story, such as rather ambiguous results of the autopsy. Also, according to the diving team, strange behavior of Watson, which does not fit into the conventional picture, where the husband grieves for his wife who just died. All these factors did not give so easily close the case. And that's why the investigation was taking quite a long time. Gabe realized the detectives were digging for him. In addition, Tina's parents did not want to accept what had happened as a tragic accident and wanted to see their son-in-law in the dock. If not as the murderer of their daughter, then at least as a man who had not helped her. During the first interrogation, the police noted that the suspect was in shock, crying and laughing, twitching nervously, asking to call his father, who complained of pain in his ears, and begging him to tell his wife's parents about the tragedy. Late at night, Gabe was released. He went to the yacht that belonged to the company that sent them to the reef and asked them for a night's lodging, arguing that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but because his wife had died, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half of the cost of their dive. In fact, he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flies to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. That same day, at Gabe's request, they go to the morgue. Gabe wanted to see his wife one more time. Because the husband was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee called the detective who was in charge of the case. In theory, Gabe could have hidden some evidence, but the grief-stricken husband only cried, held his wife's cold hand and begged her forgiveness, not realizing at all that the police officer was standing outside the door at the time, recording him on a tape recorder. "I didn't mean to hurt you." These are the words Detective Lawrence later uses against Gabe in court. Then at the morgue, "You told Tina you didn't mean to hurt her. What did you mean by that?" Lawrence will ask his question. The story of Gabe's sore ear was repeated again as he was traveling home with his wife's body. During a layover in Oakland, he sought medical attention on the airport grounds and was held there for evaluation. According to the investigation, this was done on purpose to avoid seeing Tina's father. However, and divers will confirm this, ear problems are a fairly common ailment among divers. Tina's funeral was held on November 5th, where Gabe still had to meet with the deceased's father. Gabe, almost in full view of everyone, took off his wife's wedding ring, putting it on his ring finger over hers, as well as earrings, which he immediately handed over to his father-in-law. Watson and the Thomas family never crossed paths again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe would be asked the question, "Did you really take your wife's jewelry off during the funeral?" Gabe will only smile and shrug. "I don't think I could have done it later." Everyone had different opinions about Gabe. Some said that this chubby, funny man was quite a kind man, and some on the contrary called him a tyrant and a despot. But they all agreed on one thing. Gabe and Tina were not happy, or at least they didn't seem to be. Tina's friends confirmed what she'd told her father at a family dinner on February 15th. Her union with Gabe was just a way to avoid dying alone, and that fear had led Tina to die on the seabed. Also, the victim, who died shortly before their honeymoon, confessed to a friend that her husband dragged her by the hand to an insurance company where he forced her to insure his life at a higher interest rate in case of death, and put his name in the column beneficiary. This testimony was checked through the insurance agent, and he confirmed everything. The cab driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht was also questioned. Tina cried the whole way, but her husband paid no attention to her. Finally, Tina's friend Amanda Phillips told another story, and it became clear what the couple's relationship was really like. This damn jerk videotaped Tina urinating in the bathroom and then edited it and put it in a tape of them celebrating Christmas. That would have been okay, but he turned it on at a general viewing with a full house of guests. He laughed like a horse, while everyone twiddled their fingers around their temples and tried to explain to him that it was a very low act. I was clutching crosses on my fingers so Tina wouldn't get the idea to marry him. While removing jewelry right during a funeral may seem like a frightening and denunciatory act on Gabe's part, during the trial, in 2008, the jury was shown an extremely disturbing footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers from it and carrying them away. They were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father noticed the missing flowers, and to find out the thief, he set up a hidden camera in the next row among the monuments, but he never expected to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by such an act. In court, Gabe's defense was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their own on an extreme honeymoon, and the lack of flowers on the grave was her request, which sounded very strange and unlikely. There's no telling how long the search for evidence would have dragged on if the cops had put on the exact same gear the newlyweds had and hadn't tried to stage that incident. Gabe said Tina drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face. It turned out it was impossible to put the mask on underwater by yourself unless you used another source of air, in this case, Tina's oxygen. In late November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and on June 5, 2009, Gabe's trial began, where he pleaded guilty, but only to failing to save his wife, so he was charged with negligent homicide and sent to prison for 18 months. After completing his sentence, Gabe returned home to the U.S., but a year later, the now U.S. court charged him with first-degree murder, the motive for which was to receive insurance payments after the death of his wife. Gabe's lawyer tried to defend his client, shifting all the blame on the diving company, that the employees of this company did not take care of the safety of tourists, and now, afraid of losing their license, and therefore the whole business, are trying to shift the blame on the unhappy husband who has already served his time in another country. As for the money received from the insurance company, the payout amounted to $33,000, while Gabe spent much more money on lawyers and additional expertise. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to insist that this spending was only because the husband could not assume that he would not be believed, and also the prosecutor refused to accept the fact that Gabe, with a degree in drowning rescue in hand, could not even save his wife. When Gabe had his say, he addressed the jury. "It's been 7 years since the tragedy, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about that terrible day. The public has pounced on me, blaming me for my wife's death, calling me a murderer. There wasn't a single person who looked me in the eye and said, 'Yes, I understand how bad you feel, but it's not your fault.' On the contrary, everyone just wants me dead. And here I can only understand my late wife's parents. Yes, they will never forgive me, no matter how much I kneel before them, and no matter how much I beg their forgiveness. You often hear the phrase, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child,' but I've never heard anyone say, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a wife, especially on a honeymoon.' If I can be accused of anything, it's that I didn't make enough effort to save Tina, but I've already received my punishment for that. Perhaps you all would have been satisfied if I had drowned with my wife then, 7 years ago. But I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't be able to rise from the bottom to the top. I just wanted to live, as I still want to live now." No evidence of Gabe's guilt was presented to the court. The jury found Gabe not guilty. What do you guys think? Is Gabe guilty of Tina's death? The summer of 1985 in London turned out to be sunny and warm, breathing nature and tranquility. However, at 3:30 on the morning of August 7th, a sudden phone call rang at the home of Jeremy Bamber, heir to the White House farm. The young man, barely awake, picked up the phone, wondering who could be calling him so early. On the other end of the line was his foster father, his voice sounding unusual. He was clearly panicking, and Jeremy couldn't make out his father's words. He tried to concentrate and realize what had happened, but his son's efforts were futile, and soon there was an eerie silence on the other end of the line. The last thing Jeremy heard from his father was, "Your sister's gone crazy. She's got a gun." An alarmed Jeremy, wasting no time, immediately called the police and reported the frightening conversation, emphasizing the possible danger from his sister. Officers arrived on the scene an hour and a half late after receiving the call. They were followed by Jeremy himself. There was a strange silence and stillness all around. This was suspicious after what the son of the farm owners had described to the police over the phone. Since it was suspected that weapons were involved, the English police decided not to rush inside, which was their professional tactic. The effectiveness of such actions can be discussed endlessly, but it is up to the English authorities. When they arrive at the scene of a call, they are usually unarmed and do not interfere in what is happening, waiting either for the situation to resolve itself or for a special unit to intervene. The police officers remained at a distance from the house, and Jeremy was close to them. They asked him to tell them everything that had happened at the Bamber's house the night before. According to Jeremy, on the evening of the previous day, they had been sitting around the dinner table as a family. There was a slight misunderstanding at the end of dinner, but nothing serious that could have caused such a tragedy. He also added that he had left his weapons. a pistol, and a .22 caliber carbine with his parents. Both weapons were serviceable and loaded. A special team that arrived on the scene found that all doors and windows in the house were locked, except for the window in the master bedroom on the first floor. Using a loudspeaker, they spent 2 hours trying to communicate with someone in the house. But the only sound that came from the house was the barking of a dog. Nearly 3 hours had passed since the first police officers arrived on the scene. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the SWAT team finally made their way inside the house, where an eerie silence reigned. The group moved carefully around the first floor, looking carefully through the rooms. As they approached the kitchen, they witnessed chaos. An overturned chair lay on the floor, and in a pool of blood lay the lifeless body of a man. It was Neville Bamber, Jeremy's father. Neville's body looked disfigured, bruises and abrasions on his arms and face, a broken nose and jaw, as if he had fought fiercely. There was no way to help him. 8 bullet wounds, including 6 to the head, had completely eliminated his chances of survival. On one of the surfaces of the kitchen lay a telephone with its receiver removed, next to several rounds of .22 caliber ammunition. The picture shocked the police officers, but they had to move forward to investigate the entire house in detail. It was decided to scrutinize the first floor first, and then move to the second floor if there were no other family members present. Every step had to be controlled to avoid unnecessary noise, but this proved to be a difficult task given the creaky floor of the old house. There was no one else on the first floor, but on the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, 4 more bodies were found. June, Sheila, and 2 small boys, Daniel and Nicholas. They had all been killed by gunshots. June had been shot 7 times, Daniel and Nicholas 5 and 3 shots each. Sheila was lying on the doorstep of her parents' bedroom with 2 bullet wounds under her chin and a gun in her hands. 25 bullets had been used to kill 5 family members. That number of bullets raised questions. Was it possible that someone had deliberately decided to take out the bummers on purpose, and what was the motive? Could it be that the real culprit was trying to mislead the police? Answers to all of these questions were needed, and authorities immediately began investigating and began researching the history of all members of the dead family. The history of the Bamber family. The county of Essex, with its nature, is in close proximity to the noisy and crowded London, where there is always an endless stream of tourists flowing. Nevertheless, it retains its value in the eyes of the locals, providing a haven from the bustling capital. The county invites you to relax body and soul, enjoy the fresh air, stroll through endless green meadows, taste crystal clear lake water, visit medieval castles, and immerse yourself in fascinating stories. It was probably these benefits that made Essex an attractive destination for the Bamber family, who decided to settle here. June and Neville, with the acquisition of White House Farm, were able to make their dream come true. In 1949, at the age of 25, June married Neville and the couple set off to their farm, aiming to build a strong and prosperous family. Neville, a veteran of the Royal Air Force, having completed his years of service, took on the role of magistrate of the local court. However, fate presented the couple with several unforeseen twists and turns. June's long efforts to get pregnant proved futile, but they did not despair and decided to turn to an orphanage to take in their family 2 children. So, Sheila, at just 3 months old, and later Jeremy, at 6 months old, became part of their lives. June and Neville proved to be caring parents, filling their children's days with love and care. Growing up, their children received an excellent education from them at prestigious private schools. The Bummers' financial situation was extremely prosperous, allowing them to provide their children with every opportunity. Jeremy, despite the brilliant education, was characterized by a withdrawn character and preferred solitude from childhood. His tendency to rebelliousness was evident in elementary school, where he did poorly, which led to his parents' decision to send him to boarding school in 1970 when he was 9 years old. The English boarding schools of the time were rigid, and Jeremy quickly realized that there would be strict discipline. The years at boarding school were difficult, but may have played a role in changing Jeremy's character for the better. Having excelled at university, he became more calm, and his parents were proud of their son. After successfully completing university, Jeremy's father, Neville, offered him a job on a farm in England. The young man immediately accepted the offer, and in 1982, he returned from the journey he had been on since completing his studies. His parents provided him with comfortable accommodations, including a cottage, a car, and a good salary. They also counted on him to help them in their old age. However, despite outward success within the family, Jeremy faced tensions related to religious differences. June, a deeply religious woman, experienced turbulent emotions because her children did not share her religious beliefs. Her attempts to guide them toward faith were futile. Difficulties in family relationships and frustration led her to depression. She underwent treatment that included the use of electroshock, which at the time was considered a method of dealing with mental illness. Sheila, June, and Neville's daughter also had a significant impact on her mother's development of depression. Unlike her calmer brother Jeremy, she was fascinated by the fashion world and dreamed of becoming a model. But June adamantly denied the idea, not wanting to hear about her daughter being involved in the world of show business. These were just a few of the many surprises Sheila gave her parents. At the age of 17, she announced she was pregnant, and June was faced with a difficult choice: forbid her daughter to have a child out of wedlock, as it was religiously unacceptable, or force her to have an abortion, which is also forbidden in the Christian world. In the end, June relieved herself of all responsibility and asked Sheila to make the decision herself, but in such a way that no one in their family would ever know that she had gotten rid of the pregnancy. The result was a deterioration in the relationship between mother and adopted daughter. In 1977, Sheila did marry Colin Cuffell, the father of her first unborn child, despite her parents' protests. The young men became a family and soon had twins, Nicholas and Daniel. However, after some time, Sheila began to suspect her husband of infidelity and filed for divorce. This had a serious impact on her mental health. Sheila spent several months in a psychiatric hospital where she was also treated with electroshock therapy just like her mother. Meanwhile, Sheila's sons were sent to an orphanage where they stayed for almost 2 years. Sheila's health only worsened. She became anxious, often expressing a desire to take her and her children's lives, claiming that they were under the influence of the devil. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, while Jeremy, who used to cause a lot of problems for his parents, calmed down and was happy with his life on the farm. In 1985, Sheila met up with her ex-husband Colin again, and they reunited, taking their sons from the orphanage. In August, Sheila and her children were invited to the Bamber home to meet her parents. They were going to stay there for a week, after which Colin and the boys were to take a trip to Norway. He brought Sheila and the children to the farm, and on Tuesday, August 6, 1985, everyone gathered at the beautiful White House farmhouse. It turned out to be the last dinner of the Bamber family. A few days after the tragedy, the Bamber's funeral was held, and naturally Jeremy attended. It was a difficult and bitter moment for him. He cried a lot and was shocked by what had happened. But it was on this day that the investigation took a new turn. Strange behavior was noticed in Jeremy's behavior, which relatives of the Bamber family reported to the authorities. During breaks between bouts of grief and tears, he would utter ridiculous phrases, referring to himself as the boss. Those around him saw a smile on his face, and it was an unusual smile, but a smile characteristic of a contented winner. All these observations and remarks were passed on to the authorities, and they decided to investigate more thoroughly. On this ill-fated evening, everything seemed perfect. A family dinner, a joyous mood, a delicious meal. However, one comment made by Neville and June changed things. The parents suggested that Sheila send the children back to the orphanage, emphasizing that she was unable to provide them with a proper upbringing. This provocative suggestion displeased Sheila, and she reacted sharply, saying that she was already thinking about it and would make a decision on her own. The warm atmosphere of the evening was broken. At 9:30 p.m., Jeremy headed to his house. At the same time, Barbara Wilson, the secretary of the Bamber farm, called with a work-related matter. Neville picked up the phone, and Barbara noticed that he was irritable. There were loud voices in the background. People seemed to be arguing excitedly. This atmosphere amazed Barbara, for such a thing was a rare occurrence for the Bummers. She was unable to find out the cause of the conflict, however, as Neville quickly ended the conversation and hung up the phone. The next morning, all the family members in the house were found shot dead. Jeremy was the only one of the family left alive. He was unable to hide his tears. Investigators were respectful of his emotions and gave Jeremy time to recover before beginning interviews. Jeremy shared all the information available, not forgetting to mention the difficulties his sister had faced in life and the conflict over dinner on the evening of August 6th before he left the house. At first glance, the crime committed by Sheila appears to be a desperate and certainly unconscious act, given her mental state. Under the influence of a parental remark, she could not stand the new invasion of her privacy, lost her mind, and resorted to gun violence, shooting the Bummers, her children, and herself. Investigators were certain that's exactly what happened. During an examination of the house, it became clear that the crime, which destroyed almost the entire family, was committed by the Bambers' mentally unstable adopted daughter, Sheila. This was evidenced by the weapon found lying on her body, pointing upwards towards her chin. The actions of the detectives subsequently seem rather absurd. The police decided to put the house in order and to organize a strange process of burning the bloody bedding and carpets on which the bodies were lying. The police reasoned that they wished to rid Jeremy of the horrible memories of what had happened, and the weapon found at the scene, which was potential evidence, was picked up by the officer with his bare hands. Reopening the investigation required a thorough examination of the scene to avoid jumping to conclusions. The first step was for detectives to examine the weapon. Several people's fingerprints were found on the barrel, including the investigator, who apparently picked up an important piece of evidence without using gloves. The presence of Sheila's and Jeremy's prints didn't raise any questions. Jeremy confirmed that it was his gun, designed for hunting. He had purchased it legally. Sheila's prints, being a suspect in this crime, were quite expected. However, it is worth noting that the alleged perpetrator was shot twice in different parts of her body. How did she manage to subsequently take her own life? And that's where things started to become clearer. Suddenly, Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, began to express doubts about his innocence. She contacted investigators and provided them with some curious details. On the night of August 7th, Jeremy called her, reporting problems at the farm. However, when Julie tried to find out more, Jeremy abruptly hung up. In addition, she recalled that several times before the tragedy, Jeremy had complained to her about his family, expressing fatigue with his in-laws. But the most shocking aspect of her testimony concerned the Bummers' will. It turns out that the Bummers had made a will stating that all of their property was to go to their children upon their death, half to each. And also their mother was going to rewrite their share in favor of the twins, Sheila. This fact turned Jeremy against his sister. He did not like this prospect, and he openly shared it with his friend. Besides, Neville's will stated that Jeremy would have to work on the farm to get his share of the inheritance. But the worst part was when Julie heard him say how Jeremy dreamed of killing his family and putting the blame on the mentally unstable Sheila. He demonstrated some good acting skills by portraying himself as a witness to the tragic drama in front of the police officers. According to Julie, she told the police about it not only out of a desire to help in the investigation, but also out of a thirst for revenge, having learned about Jeremy's mistress. In an attempt to cover his tracks and draw the detective's attention away from himself, Jeremy gave the police the name of a potential suspect. He targeted a plumber he supposedly hired to work on the property. However, this cunning plan did not work. The plumber was found and interrogated, but his alibi was solid. The plumber not only did not understand why he was being questioned about the crime, but also provided clear evidence that he was elsewhere at the time of the events. Thus, the circle of suspects was narrowed down to one, Jeremy Bamber himself. Despite his temporary arrest, the lack of concrete evidence led to his release. Moreover, the police did not restrict his travel abroad, although it was known that after the inheritance, Jeremy's financial condition had improved markedly. Soon, he had already left England and traveled to Saint-Tropez, France, to enjoy a vacation. And a few days before, he easily got rid of his father's car by selling it. Jeremy's cousins demanded that the version that Sheila killed her family be reconsidered. They went to the police and the media, to which the deputy head of the CID once ordered the Bamber cousins to leave his office when they asked him to consider that James Bamber had arranged the whole thing. Afterward, one of the brothers decided to inspect the scene in secret from the others. His strong doubts about Sheila's involvement in the murder prompted him to look for more evidence. By then, Jeremy had gotten the keys to his parents' house and was living there all alone. His cousin managed to get through the door and around every corner of the house, hoping to find some new evidence, and his search was successful. In one of the closets, he found an item that gave him a shock, a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine with traces of blood. It was something that spurred him to new conclusions. The length of the weapon, including the installed silencer, told him that the assailant would not have been able to turn it on himself and shoot himself. This meant that Sheila could not have been involved in the crime. Having been shot twice and bleeding, she would not have been able to remove the silencer and hide it deep in the closet. But assuming that she fired without this additional device, a new question arises. Why were there traces of blood on the end of the silencer? Thus, it only confirmed that it had been fitted to the carbine at the time of the crime. On September 29th, Jeremy returned home and was immediately arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial, which lasted 18 days, began on October 3, 1986 at Chelmsford Crown Court. Jeremy Bamber looked arrogant as he took his seat in the dock. Throughout the trial, prosecutors accused him of lying. The station's telephone technicians checked and confirmed that the phone line at Bamber's home was busy that night. The medical examiner's testimony at trial was key. Injuries on Neville's body found by the experts included several bruises, indicating that the elderly man had resisted blows. The medical examiner suggested that Neville had been beaten with the very same .22 caliber carbine. However, given Sheila's frailty and short stature, it is doubtful that she could have inflicted such serious injuries on her father before his death. It is more likely that Jeremy was capable of such an act. Neville's body was covered in bruises, and it is obvious that Sheila must have also taken a few blows during the fight. However, there were no signs of beatings or bruises on her body. Jeremy's lawyers insisted that Sheila, despite her mental problems, was physically fit and capable of crime. Her experience with guns and excellent shooting skills were arguments that she could have committed the crime. They also noticed that Sheila's blood was fresher than that of other family members, which, in their opinion, indicated the likelihood that she had first massacred her family and then herself. This may have been the result of a realization of her act or, as the defense lawyer suggested, a reaction to the approaching police officers. After hearing these theories, the prosecution unequivocally refuted them. The silencer was found in the closet with traces of blood belonging to Sheila, although, logically, it should have been on the carbine. These statements were irrefutable. The defense was in a difficult position and had no more arguments to counter the prosecution's case. According to the prosecution, the motive for the crime was Jeremy's anger at learning of the divided will. The money was the reason he had arranged the bloodbath. On the day of the incident, the housekeeper saw Sheila and did not notice anything unusual in her behavior. The day before, 2 employees had also seen her with the children and said she was happy and adequate. According to the testimony of Barbara Wilson, the farm clerk, she called Neville at about 9:30 p.m. and was under the impression that she had broken off an argument. Barbara said that Neville was not happy and seemed to hang up in annoyance, which he had never done before. In her opinion, he was a calm man. It was at this time, between 10:30 and 10 o'clock, that Jeremy left his in-laws and headed home. Late at night, he returned on the bicycle he had borrowed from his mother a few days before the events, avoiding the main road so as not to be seen. Taking advantage of an open window in a first-floor room, Jeremy got inside and found a pre-prepared and loaded gun. When he entered his parents' bedroom, he fired 2 shots, killing Jane. Then he pointed the gun at Neville, but his father woke up and tried to defend himself. A struggle ensued, during which father and son went downstairs, and there Jeremy was able to kill his father in the kitchen. He then returned to the bedroom where he finished off Sheila and her children. To make it appear that his sister was guilty of the crime, Jeremy placed the carbine in the dead Sheila's hands. Afterward, he returned to his bike and headed home. He first called his friend Julie, and almost gave himself away with excitement, and then called the police, talking about his father allegedly calling. This call also raised questions for the investigation. If Neville was in danger, he probably would have gone to the police, not to his son. And the phone in the Bamber house was not covered in blood, even though the father, according to Jeremy's testimony, was probably injured at the time of the call. This suggested that the telephone receiver in the house had been removed for staging. Jeremy's own behavior also raised suspicions. Why, after his father called, did he not rush to the scene? After all, it was his family. Based on all the known facts and assumptions, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. Before doing so, the judge pointed out 3 main questions to the jury. They had to decide who should be believed, Julie Mugford or Jeremy Bamber. It was also important to find out if they were convinced that Sheila did not commit the crime. The judge emphasized that this issue was linked to another important question. Was the second fatal shot fired at Sheila fired with a silencer? If the answer is yes, that eliminated the possibility that she could have committed the shot. Finally, was a call from Neville Bamber to his son actually made in the middle of the night? The absence of such a call undermined Jason's entire version of events. On October 28th, after more than 9 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Jason Bamber guilty by a majority vote of 10-2, the minimum required for conviction. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences in prison without parole. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd ruled in 1988 that Bamber should not be released. The case remains a matter of controversy, despite there being no direct evidence that Jeremy Bamber is guilty. He is serving his sentence. There is a belief that there may have been a miscarriage of justice, and the true culprit is his sister Sheila. Bamber insists on his innocence by filing appeals. His lawyer argues that the judgment was biased because of Jeremy's aggressive behavior in court. Jeremy Bamber believes that there is no evidence of his guilt, and there are many unexplained points in the case. Tests on Sheila's hands were not conducted, there was police misconduct at the scene, and there remained speculation of retaliation by Jeremy's ex-girlfriend. A trial was held in 1991 at Bamber's request, but in 1996, a police officer destroyed much of the physical evidence. Jeremy's defense team called it a disgrace. In 1997, a DNA test was conducted that showed the presence of Sheila and June's blood in the silencer, but the results were complicated and ambiguous. In 2012, gun experts from the US and UK argued that the injuries on the bodies were not consistent with the use of a silencer. In 2015, Jeremy Bamber filed an appeal demanding that all evidence be turned over to the defense, under the guise of a lawyer, for which he was sentenced to an additional 14 years in prison for fraud. Seeking proof of his innocence, Bamber set up websites to discuss the case and offered a large reward for evidence that could overturn his conviction. The Bamber family's case continues to attract public attention and raise doubts about the correctness of the verdict. What do you think about it? Is Jeremy guilty? On a vast site 60 miles south of Melbourne lies a landfill. As with any dump on a large plot of land, there are towering piles of domestic waste. Birds circle over the meter-high piles, while a foul smell spreads for miles around. This place is usually devoid of people. However, in May 2004, hundreds of police officers were sifting through the trash. The scene resembled something out of an apocalyptic movie, especially when investigators and police officers donned protective suits against biological hazards and ultra-durable masks to guard against asbestos-ridden dirt. The area was littered with thousands of blue trash bags. Each day of searching was incredibly challenging. They had to check every bag. This lengthy and inevitable process significantly delayed the investigation. After 3 weeks of searching, the officers were disheartened and had exhausted their moral and physical resources. On the final day, they had one last chance to find the mother and daughter. Narelle Fraser, a young woman working in the missing persons department, had put significant effort into the search from the first day, each time apprehensively beginning the inspection of a new blue bag. Around 10 a.m. on another day of searching, an excavator pulled up another batch of bags from the depths of a massive pile of garbage for inspection. Fraser noticed a blue bag stuck at the top of the bucket. As she had done hundreds of times over the past days, she paused the search to conduct a thorough examination of the excavated trash. Climbing up the pile, the woman opened the trash bag, but seeing only a kitchen glove, she signaled to continue the search. But something was off. The investigator's intuition brought her back to the bag, and when she reopened it, she saw something else. What she had mistaken for a kitchen glove was actually a bloated, decomposing human hand. She screamed aloud. She had found them. Today, let us visit the marvelous Australia, specifically Mornington Island, where despite the beauty of the surrounding nature, mild climate, and welcoming atmosphere, a nightmare akin to a horror film occurred. In May 2004, John Sharp appeared on television pleading for help. Holding a photograph, he tearfully implored anyone with information about the disappearance of his wife and daughter to contact the police and assist in their search. As it turned out, Anna Sharp and her 18-month-old daughter, Gracie, had been missing from their home since March. Let's start from the beginning and figure out who is involved in the disappearance of Anna and Gracie Sharp. We'll learn where the mother and daughter went, and whether John Sharp could have really harmed his own family, or if someone else is to blame for their disappearance. Anna Kemp was born on September 27, 1962, in Dunedin, New Zealand. As an adult, she moved to Melbourne, Australia, hoping to build a career, find love, and live her best life. John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, to Valerie and Miles Sharp. The couple owned several pastry shops and lived a quiet, peaceful life in Mornington, Victoria. John grew up in a large, happy family with 4 older sisters. Later, the Sharp family welcomed another boy. John Sharp's early years were largely unremarkable. He had social issues and was heavily dependent on his parents. He had low emotional intelligence and lacked the ability to cope with stressors in his life. Sharp completed 12 grades but failed his exams. In addition to a lack of emotional intelligence and an unwillingness to face his own problems, he couldn't handle stress, so he tended to shift decisions onto others. After leaving high school, John took a job at the State Bank, where he met Anna Kemp. At the time of their meeting, Anna was 31 and John was 27. They were very different in temperament. He was always a loner and had no friends because he had been very shy since childhood and could only communicate freely with his family members. Anna, on the other hand, was cheerful, lively, and attentive to others. This greatly attracted John, and he showed her as much attention as he could afford. At first, she did not like him, but then she noticed his interest in her and saw how he opened up around her, transforming from a reserved, silent man into a confident and engaging conversationalist. Anna took notice, and the young couple began dating. In October 1994, they married. The ceremony was modest and took place in a close family circle. Anna's close relatives from New Zealand also attended the wedding, but they did not share her choice, thinking that Anna was too good for him. Decorum prevented them from voicing their opinion out loud, so the parents remained silent and supported their daughter's choice. However, during the honeymoon, Anna herself began to doubt the correctness of her choice. In a phone conversation with her mother Lila, she complained that she had rushed into it and that there was no real strong love between her and John. But being a devout Catholic, she accepted her choice and decided to try to establish good family relations with her husband and become a full family. They lived together for 7 long years in various places around the Mornington coast and appeared to be a perfectly happy family. But in reality, they lived their lives separately. By the end of 2001, Anna and John learned they were expecting a child. Anna was happy as she had long dreamed of having a child, but John was opposed, as they had agreed before marriage that they would not have children. Anna disregarded John's opinion and kept the pregnancy. Thus, in August 2002, baby Gracie Louise Sharp was born. The little girl had a difficult start to life as she was born with hip dysplasia. This is a congenital malformation of the joint that is corrected by wearing a special brace for a long time. The principle of such a brace involves bending the child's legs at the knee and hip joint and holding them in such a position. Wearing the brace around the clock creates certain discomfort for sleep and full life. Such inconveniences for the little newborn girl were very difficult during the first few months of life. It was expected that this condition would not create long-term problems for Gracie, but in infancy, she felt very uncomfortable and experienced significant distress while wearing the brace. But Anna cared for her daughter with complete dedication, hoping to remove the brace as soon as possible. The girl was very weak, ate poorly, slept little, required constant attention and care. Anna's time was entirely occupied with caring for her daughter. John was dissatisfied that his wife, Anna, devoted all her time to their daughter Gracie, and their marital relationship grew increasingly tense. However, Anna was unconcerned with John's feelings, as she was fully occupied with their daughter. Even after the removal of Gracie's brace, her sleep issues worsened, prompting Anna to seek professional help. The ordeal was exhausting for her. Anna quit her job to dedicate all her time to Gracie. The Sharp family was financially well off and wanted for nothing. In previous years, John had started a company in property staging and flipping, which allowed them to build a substantial financial cushion. In late 2003, the couple bought a house on Prince Street, close to John's parents' home. Soon after moving in, Anna surprised John with news of her second pregnancy. Anna was thrilled, as she had dreamed of having 2 children, but John was very displeased with the news and even once questioned whether the child was his. Despite their differences, their relationship appeared to be quite good. On March 21st, 2004, Anna, John, and little Gracie were invited to a family celebration. They seemed perfectly happy, and none of the attendees noticed anything unusual. But 2 days later, Anna disappeared. John behaved oddly. Perhaps each person grieves in their own way, but he did not report her missing to the police, nor did he look for her among friends and relatives, as if he knew where his wife was. And so it turned out. Sometime later, John confidently told Anna's mother in a phone conversation that she had run off with another man. He explained that he didn't know where she was or with whom. He also mentioned that Anna had taken her mobile phone with her. However, little Gracie stayed with John. This was most strange to Anna's relatives. They couldn't believe it, knowing that Gracie was neither needed nor of interest to John, and Anna would never have done such a thing. Anna's relatives never believed the story John told them. They knew Anna well enough to believe that she would never leave her Gracie, who still required constant care. On March 28th, John called her parents again and reported that Anna had come home by taxi and taken Gracie. He also stated that Anna would not return and that the child she was expecting was not his. This news completely dismayed the Kemp family. What John told them about Anna was not true to their daughter, but Anna's mother was adamant that her daughter would not leave the house, especially 20 weeks into her pregnancy. So who is John Sharp, a grief-stricken father and husband, or a participant in the disappearance of his own family? Over time, Anna's family received a letter via social media,
stating that she had moved to another city to start a new life with a new lover, and asked not to be disturbed until she was fully settled. In the letter, she wrote that she was unhappy in her marriage to John, was tired, and wanted to start over in a new relationship. But Anna's relatives knew she would never behave like that. She would call, talk, and not hide like a fugitive. Moreover, the letter was not written in Anna's style, which cast significant doubt on whether it was actually penned by her. The facts that Anna herself wasn't answering phone calls, that she was unreachable, and the strange letter, seemingly not written by Anna herself, compelled her relatives to contact the police. Following protocol, the New Zealand police called John Sharp, but were told the same story about her leaving him for another man. There were enough suspicions to report the case to the police in Mornington, Australia, who immediately contacted John. Sharp failed to convince the police that everything was fine, and they promptly referred the case to the Victoria Missing Persons Unit. Within a few hours, an investigative team was dispatched. However, the truth is not always obvious, and the police conducted a thorough check. They visited the Sharp home, where John remained alone. John cooperated with the investigation and appeared genuinely distraught and upset. He recounted how Anna, upon leaving for the first time, got into a blue car. He reported that Anna and Gracie had moved to Chelsea. They took all their belongings and are likely now happily living their new life without him. After John's testimony, the police asked to inspect the house, and he agreed without hesitation. The first floor looked completely normal. The inspection of the second floor somewhat surprised the investigators. The main bedroom lacked a mattress, and the children's room was missing a crib. John explained that he had sold the mattress, and Anna had taken the crib to their new home. The police then checked Anna's phone. The last calls were to an insurance company and one from an unknown number. In the first case, she wanted to add a new family member to the insurance. The unknown number turned out to be from a regular TV repairman. It turned out Anna had arranged for him to come and repair the television in their living room on March 24th, which had been broken for a long time. The police located this repairman, and he said that when he arrived for the job, John answered the door and told him that his services were not needed as the television was already working. The police also checked social networks, but Anna did not use them. Despite their efforts, the investigators found no evidence that Anna Sharp had another man in her life. John reported that Anna had come home for Gracie by taxi, but no taxi company confirmed this trip. A significant lead in the search for Anna Sharp was a bouquet of flowers she sent on her mother's birthday with a signed card. However, the words in the card did not seem like wishes from Anna, again causing her family to doubt that everything was all right with her. Bank statement details showed that the bouquet was indeed paid for with Anna Sharp's card. As there were no witnesses or evidence to support John's claim that Anna had gotten into a blue car on the purported day she left, nor was there any evidence of bus, plane tickets, or hotel bookings. Anna's friends had absolutely no information that could confirm the story that she had run off with another man. So, what happened to Anna Sharp and her young daughter? On June 10th, John Sharp was questioned by the police again, but he stuck to his story. After the questioning, John Sharp was released. However, this was a tactical move by the investigators as they had put John under surveillance, hoping to catch any clue that could aid in the search. John Sharp was a loner who hardly made any calls and didn't entertain guests, so the investigators had undercover police follow him. During this period, John gave a memorable TV interview in which he tearfully pleaded with Anna to contact him, holding a photograph of Gracie and crying insincerely. The surveillance team continued to tail him and one day caught him in a suspicious act. After the interview, he drove to Chelsea Beach. He walked cautiously, frequently looking over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching or following him. He approached a specific bush on the shore and pulled out a white plastic bag. Taking it, he returned to his car. There, he took a phone out of the plastic bag and made a call, then drove to the nearest ATM and withdrew cash. After that, he put everything back in the bag and buried it under the bushes on the beach. All these suspicious activities were captured on video by the surveillance team. Then John went home and called the missing persons department,
claiming his wife had just called him and withdrawn cash from their joint account. After obtaining video evidence of Sharp disposing of incriminating evidence in a trash bin and retrieving a credit card hidden in the plastic bag, he was arrested. During initial interrogations as a suspect, John continued to repeat his story. However, he could not explain why he buried Emma's phone and her bank card. John fell silent. The detectives knew they needed to find another way to get through to him, so they invited his parents, showed them the incriminating footage of their son on Chelsea Beach, and then sent them to talk to him. An hour later, they emerged, and Sharp was ready to talk. Initially, John Sharp stuck to his story, but eventually, he confessed to the elimination with a spear gun of 41-year-old pregnant Anna Marie Kemp Sharp and 20-month-old Gracie Louise Sharp. During press conferences with John, his parents were always present. John would interrupt the conversation and leave the room. He would feel ill. He behaved unnaturally. He would roll his eyes and cry. According to him, Anna was a tyrant with a difficult character. He decided to eliminate her to save himself. An adult man ended the life of his pregnant wife because, in his view, she stood between him and his family. But beyond his confession, the police continued to look for evidence. During further searches of the house with detection dogs in the bedroom and little Gracie's room, traces of blood were found. In the trash, they found notes where John had written everything he planned to say during interrogations. A torn photo with the name Francis was also found. Anna had hoped to name their expected son Francis. In subsequent interrogations, John Sharp detailed how he had planned the end of his pregnant wife and then his young daughter. On the evening of March 23rd, the couple argued, after which Anna went to bed, but John did not. He wallowed in self-pity, believing his marriage was unhappy. It was then he decided to retrieve his spear gun from the garage. The circumstances of buying the spear gun were quite suspicious, as John Sharp had never shown any interest in spearfishing or any sport requiring such equipment. Nevertheless, he bought 2 spears for the gun using cash, leaving no trace that could prove the purchase of the weapon. While his wife slept, he loaded the gun and returned to their bedroom. John positioned the gun just inches from her left temple and fired into her skull. The shot did not instantly end Anna's life, so Sharp took the second spear and fired again. He then covered his now deceased wife with towels to avoid looking at her face, went downstairs, and slept on the couch. The next day, John Sharp woke up and went about his day as usual. He dropped his daughter Gracie off at daycare, came home, and a TV repairman visited while Anna's body still lay in the bed upstairs. After the repairman left, John tried to remove the spears stuck in his pregnant wife's head. It was a difficult task, so Sharp decided to unscrew the shafts and leave the spear tips inside Anna's skull. Then, he dug a shallow grave in the backyard and buried her, throwing her into a dirty pit. He then casually went to pick up his daughter from daycare as if nothing had happened. The deception began. John Sharp made up an elaborate story about his wife leaving him for another man and told it to his mother-in-law in New Zealand. On March 27, 2004, John put his daughter Gracie to bed. He drank several glasses of whiskey and Coke. While intoxicated, he went to the garage and loaded his shotgun with a spear he had just purchased and buried the other 2 spear tips in the backyard with his wife. He then walked over to Gracie's crib and aimed the weapon at her head. Either Sharp closed his eyes or the alcohol prevented him from aiming, but the first shot penetrated Gracie's skull but did not cut off her life. She screamed in agony as the spear slammed into her head. Then he reloaded the gun and fired 2 more shots at Gracie. Amazingly, she survived. Finally, the distraught father pulled the first spear out of Gracie's skull and fired the final fatal shot. John Sharp later admitted that the moment he ended his wife's life, he knew he had to do the same to his daughter. He even took Gracie with him to the sporting goods store to buy new spears for the shotgun. The next day, Sharp covered his daughter's face with a towel because he couldn't bear to look at her dead face and removed the spears from Gracie's head. He then wrapped her in garbage bags, secured her body with duct tape, and threw his daughter into a landfill along with her toys and the weapons he used to end her life. Then, John exhumed Anna's body and dismembered it with a chainsaw. He wrapped the body parts in trash bags and secured them with tape. He then placed them in the trunk of his car and drove to the landfill. The investigators had enough evidence for an arrest, but did they have enough to charge and convict him? There was still hope that further surveillance might lead them to the bodies. However, after several days of inactivity from John Sharp, the team decided to arrest him and bring him back to the Missing Persons Department. John Sharp's confession to the ends of his wife and daughter was just the beginning of the horror. The task of finding the bodies he dumped at the landfill like trash was daunting. Due to space constraints, bins from the Mornington City dump were transferred to another landfill. The trash bags were traced to an incident location in Tuarong, and thanks to meticulous waste management at the landfill, police were able to pinpoint an area of about 100 square meters where they believed the bodies would be found. This saved the team an immeasurable amount of time and effort. At the end of June, extensive searches began, and for the next 3 weeks, the police meticulously sifted through the trash at the landfill near Devil Bend Reservoir. Australian winter corresponds to summer months, and almost all 3 weeks were rainy and chilly. However, the search did not stop for a minute. For the police officers searching for the mother and daughter, this case became a personal mission. They ventured out in any weather and on their days off, despite the challenges of working in protective suits, masks, and the daunting environment. After 19 days, Norelle Fraser discovered a bundle containing part of Anna Sharp's body. Later, photographs of Anna's mother and other personal items were found at the landfill, likely fallen out of the bag when it tore during handling. After this long-awaited discovery, Norelle Fraser shared that she would never forget the experience of finding Anna Kemp's body. She felt as if Anna was somehow calling out to her to be found. She also confessed that the initial thrill the team felt at the first discovery quickly faded with the realization that little Gracie must be nearby. "I just held my head in my hands and cried. I cried for what Anna went through, for Anna's family, for humanity, I guess. But the thought of Gracie being there..." Fraser paused. By the end of July, all bags containing the remains of Anna and Gracie were found. At the trial, John Sharp confessed to the premeditated ends of Anna Kemp and Gracie. The adult man explained his act by saying his wife had been getting on his nerves. Therefore, he purchased a spear gun and practiced using it in the shed several days before the act. On the night of the act, after Anna had gone to bed, he grabbed the spear gun and fired at her head while she was asleep. He then buried her in the backyard. The next day, John Sharp went to a hardware store in Frankston and purchased a roll of duct tape, 2 polyethylene tarps, and an electric chainsaw. That same evening, after drinking heavily, he used the same spear gun to fire at his young daughter's head. Over the next few days, Sharp exhumed his wife from her shallow grave, cut her body into 3 parts and disposed of her in the same manner as he had his daughter. He placed the body in a garbage bag and discarded it with household trash. As the charade continued, John began a thorough cleanup. He disposed of blood-stained mattresses and sent fake emails posing as Anna. He threw away Gracie's belongings and sent flowers to his mother-in-law for her birthday. In an effort to sustain his deception, John used Anna's bank card in a bank in Chelsea and even sent an email to her mother in New Zealand, pretending to be her. John Sharp appeared on television, pleading with his wife to contact him and her family to reassure them of her safety. "Anna, our marriage is over, but I still love you, and you are the mother of our wonderful daughter Gracie, whom we both adore more than anyone else." He signed a written statement to the police, claiming he had nothing to do with her disappearance. John Sharp continued to lie for 3 months. However, he was no actor, and his script did not have the ending he had planned. On August 5th, 2005, John Miles Sharp was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his pregnant wife and child, with no chance of parole for 33 years. He is currently held in solitary confinement due to threats and assassination attempts by fellow inmates. John Sharp, dubbed the Mornington Monster, was sentenced in 2005 to 2 consecutive life terms and is considered the worst case of familicide in Victoria. Anna and Gracie were buried in Anna's hometown. The name of their unborn son, Francis, is inscribed on their shared headstone. In Gracie's documents, the father's name is now left blank. But did John really murder his wife because of their loveless marriage and his desire not to have another child, or was there another motive? In addressing his dislike for his wife and child, he could have done what many in the modern world do, divorce and move on alone, but that's what any rational person would say. John Sharp, a true monster, chose to solve his problems by ending the lives of his loved ones. Amidst all the madness that had taken over his mind, it's clear that he had lost touch with reality. There's no other explanation.